There is a grief that the world does not know how to name, because nothing visible was ever lost. No funeral is held for it. No casserole arrives at the door. No one says they are sorry for your loss, because to everyone watching, there is no loss to see. But you know. You know the weight of the empty room you have not let yourself decorate. You know the ache of arms that long to hold a child who has not come. You know the quiet, monthly rhythm of it, the careful hope that builds, and then the crushing disappointment that arrives again, and the grief you swallow because you feel you have no right to mourn something that never was. And all around you, the world keeps announcing what you cannot have. Another pregnancy revealed, another baby shower invitation, another well-meaning person asking, with no idea of the wound they are pressing, when the two of you are finally going to start a family. You smile, you say something kind, and inside, something breaks a little more. If that is the grief you carry tonight, if your arms ache for a child who has not come, if you have prayed and hoped and waited through more disappointments than you can count, if you flinch at pregnancy announcements and dread the questions and wonder quietly whether God has somehow forgotten you, then I want to sit with you for this hour, gently. Not with easy answers, because you have heard enough of those, and most of them only hurt. Not with promises I have no right to make about what your future holds, but to tell you something true and tender, that your grief is real and seen, that the God who made you has not forgotten you in this longing, and that your worth has never, for one moment, depended on whether a child comes. So stay with me, and let me speak gently to the one whose arms are empty, and whose heart is so very full of longing. And let me say at the very start what I will not do, so you can trust me through this hour. I am not going to hand you a formula, the 5 steps, or the special prayer, or the secret of faith that will supposedly unlock the child you long for, because there is no such formula, and anyone who sells you one is adding a burden to your grief. And I am not going to promise you that your story will end the way you most want it to, because I do not know what your future holds, and you have been hurt enough by people who spoke with a confidence they had no right to have. What I can offer you is only what is actually true, and what is actually true is gentler and steadier than any promise about outcomes. That you are not forgotten, that your tears are not unseen, that your worth is not in question, and that the God who formed you walks with you in this valley, whether or not the road ever leads where you are praying it will. That is a smaller promise than a baby, but it is one I can make without lying to you, and it may hold more than you think. Let me begin by simply naming what this is like, because so much of the pain of it is that you carry it alone and unspoken. It is the monthly rhythm of hope and heartbreak. Few burdens are as relentless as this one, because it renews itself on a schedule. Each cycle begins with a fragile, almost involuntary hope, a hope you try to talk yourself out of because you cannot bear to be disappointed again. And yet, it rises anyway. And then comes the answer, the same answer, and with it, the grief crashes back, fresh as the first time. A small death repeated month after month after month. It is exhausting in a way few things are, this living on a cycle of hope deliberately raised and then crushed, over and over, with no end you can see and no way to make it stop. And it reshapes the whole calendar of your life into something quietly painful. Weeks that should be ordinary become charged with meaning. Days of careful watching and waiting. And then the day the hope dies again, and a private mourning no one around you even knows is happening. You learn to brace yourself. You try not to hope, because hoping hurts so much when it is dashed. And yet you cannot help but hope, because the longing is too deep to suppress. And so you are caught between a hope you cannot kill and a disappointment you cannot avoid, month after month after month. It can make you feel as though your whole life has been handed over to a rhythm you did not choose and cannot escape. Your peace rising and falling on a tide you have no power to still. That is a heavy way to live, and if you are weary down to your bones from it, your weariness makes complete sense. No one was made to endure that cycle of raised and broken hope indefinitely without growing tired. It is the silent grief that no one knows how to mourn. When someone loses a loved one, the world gathers around them. There is a name for the loss, a ritual for the grief, people who know to bring comfort. But the loss of a child who was only ever longed for has no name the world recognizes, no funeral, no gathered friends. You are mourning the babies you imagined, the future you assumed, the child whose face you have pictured 1,000 times. And you are mourning it in total silence. Because how do you explain to anyone the grief of losing something you never had? So you carry it alone, this invisible sorrow, and the loneliness of grieving unseen is its own deep wound, and it is made heavier by the strange pressure to keep it hidden, to protect everyone else from the depth of it. You learn to deflect, to change the subject, to give a light answer when someone asks the heavy question, because to explain the true weight of it would make them uncomfortable or invite the very platitudes that wound you most. So you become skilled at carrying an enormous grief behind an ordinary face, mourning in private and functioning in public. And the gap between what you feel and what you let anyone see grows wider and lonelier with time. There is an exhaustion in that hidden labor that no one around you can measure, because they do not know it is happening. If you are tired in a way you cannot explain to anyone, this may be part of why. You have been doing the heavy, secret work of grieving alone while appearing to be fine. And that is one of the most depleting things a human heart can do. You were not made to carry a sorrow this large in total secrecy. And part of what your soul may most need is simply one safe place where the hiding can stop. It is the world that will not stop reminding you. Everywhere you turn, it seems, there is what you do not have. The pregnancy announcements that arrive like small blows, the baby showers you are expected to attend and smile through while your heart quietly bleeds, the social media full of growing families, the holidays built around mothers and fathers that become days of private mourning, the thoughtless questions from people who could never guess what they are touching. You cannot escape it, the constant reminder of the one thing your arms ache for. And each reminder reopens the wound just as it was beginning to scab over. And some days are almost unbearable. The day set aside to honor mothers, when you sit in a gathering and watch the mothers stand to be celebrated, and you stay in your seat with a smile fixed over a breaking heart. The day for fathers, with its own quiet ache for the man who longed to raise a child. The family holidays that revolve around children, the gift-giving, the traditions you cannot yet begin. These ordinary celebrations, joyful for everyone around you, become private days of mourning that you must somehow get through while pretending to share the general happiness. And there is a particular exhaustion in performing joy you do not feel, in protecting everyone else from the depth of your sorrow on the very days it is sharpest. If those days undo you, you are not being dramatic or ungrateful. You are grieving on the days the world has filled with exactly what you have lost. And it would be strange if they did not hurt. Be gentle with yourself on those days. They are harder than anyone around you knows. It is the reproach, the shame, the secret fear that something is wrong with you. In quiet moments, the cruelest thoughts come, that you are somehow defective, less of a woman, less of a man, incomplete, a failure at the most basic and natural thing. That everyone else can do this effortlessly and you cannot, and that this lack defines you, marks you, sets you apart as someone deficient. The world has whispered this reproach to childless people for as long as there have been people, and even when no one says it aloud, you say it to yourself, and it cuts deeper than any words from outside ever could. And the cruelty of this particular shame is how private and how constant it is. It is not an accusation made once and answered. It is a quiet voice that follows you, attaching itself to your most ordinary moments, turning your own body into something you feel has betrayed or failed you. You may look at yourself with a kind of grief, mourning not just the missing child, but the sense of your own brokenness, the feeling that you are somehow not whole, not functioning, not what you were supposed to be. And because the shame is so intimate, so wrapped up in your sense of who you are, it is hard to argue yourself out of it, hard to silence the voice that says the lack is not just something you are experiencing, but something you are. Hold on tonight, because I am going to tell you, before this hour is done, exactly how God answers that voice. And his answer is not a grudging reassurance, but a staggering honor. For now, simply know this: the shame you feel is not the truth about you. It is a liar that has been allowed to speak too long, and it does not get the final word over who you are. It is the loneliness, even within a marriage. This grief can isolate you even from the person closest to you, because the two of you may carry it so differently, may grieve on different rhythms, may not know how to comfort each other when you are each drowning in the same sorrow. And it isolates you from friends who move on into a world of parenting you cannot enter, whose conversations now center on children, who drift, not unkindly, into a life you are not part of. You can feel utterly alone in this, even surrounded by people, because so few understand, and the ones closest to you are sometimes the hardest to reach across the shared pain. And there is a special grief in the way it can come between you and your spouse, the one person who should understand it best. You are grieving the same loss, and yet you may grieve it so differently that you cannot seem to meet each other in it. One of you may want to talk and the other to go silent. One may want to keep trying and the other to rest. One may carry it as sorrow and the other as a quiet, locked-away ache that looks, from the outside, almost like indifference. And so, the very grief that should draw you together can drive a wedge, each of you alone in your sorrow while lying beside the only other person who truly shares it. If that is happening, know that it is common, and it is not a sign that your marriage is failing or that your spouse does not care. It is two wounded people grieving in their own ways, and it can, with patience and gentleness and grace, become a place where you learn to hold each other's sorrow rather than be divided by it. You do not have to grieve identically to grieve together, and the God who sees you both can help you find your way back to one another, even here. And underneath all of it is the question that haunts the praying heart: does God even hear me? You have prayed this prayer more than any other. You have begged, bargained, wept, surrendered, begged again, and still the answer has not come, or has come as silence, and you cannot help but wonder why. Why her and not me? Why does it seem so easy for everyone else? Has God forgotten me? Is he saying no? And if so, why? That spiritual ache, the fear that your most desperate prayer is falling on deaf ears, can be the heaviest part of the whole burden. Let me speak gently to all of it, because this is the wound beneath the wound. The empty arms are agony enough, but the silence of heaven on top of them can shake the very ground you stand on. You were taught that God is good, that he hears, that he gives good gifts to his children. And yet here is this good gift, this holy desire to love and raise a child, and it seems to be the one prayer he will not answer. And so a terrible confusion sets in, a struggle not just with grief, but with God himself, with everything you believed about how he works and how he loves. If you have found yourself there, wrestling with God in the dark, half afraid your faith is failing because you cannot understand his silence, hear this. That wrestling is not the opposite of faith. The people in Scripture who wrestled most honestly with God were not the faithless ones. They were the ones who took him seriously enough to bring him their hardest questions. Your struggle to understand is not a betrayal of God. It is the honest grappling of a heart that still believes enough to be troubled by the silence. And God is not angered by it. He can hold your questions, your confusion, even your anger, without loving you any less. Before I go on, let me say one hard thing about the things people say, because you have surely heard them, and they have surely hurt. Just relax and it will happen. Just adopt and you will get pregnant. Maybe it is not God's will. Everything happens for a reason. You just need more faith. Each of these, however well meant, lands like a blow, because each one, in its own way, blames you for your own heartbreak, or reduces your grief to a problem to be solved. So let me say clearly, your longing is not a lack of faith. Your grief is not a failure to relax. And anyone who has handed you these tidy explanations was speaking from a comfort they have not had to question. You are allowed to set those words down. They were never the truth, and they were never from God. Here is what is true, and I want you to hold it gently. The Bible does not look away from this particular grief. It does not tuck the childless into a footnote or rush past their pain. Some of the most carefully told stories in all of Scripture are the stories of women who longed for years for a child that would not come. And God recorded their grief with tenderness, took their tears seriously, and met them in the ache. He is not embarrassed by your longing, and he is not distant from it. He sees it. He has always seen it. And the same God who saw those women in their barrenness sees you tonight, with the same tenderness, the same attention, the same refusal to look away. And it is worth noticing how God chose to tell these stories, because it says something about how he regards your grief. He could have left these women out of the great narrative entirely, or mentioned their barrenness in a single passing line. Instead, he gave them names, recorded their words, preserved their prayers and their tears and their long waiting, and wove their stories into the very center of his unfolding plan. He treated the grief of childless women as something worth remembering forever. something significant enough to be carried in the sacred scriptures across thousands of years. That is not the act of a God who finds this grief trivial or embarrassing. It is the act of a God who takes it with the utmost seriousness, who refuses to let the sorrow of the longing heart go unrecorded and unhonored. So when you feel that your grief is too small to matter, that the world is right to overlook it, remember that God Himself thought it important enough to enshrine forever in His Word. Your sorrow is not beneath His notice. It never has been. Let me tell you about one of them, a woman named Rachel. She was deeply loved by her husband, and yet there was a wound in her life that his love could not heal. Because while her sister bore son after son after son, Rachel remained childless, year after aching year. Imagine the particular cruelty of that, to watch someone close to you receive again and again the very thing you are dying for, to attend the births, to hear the announcements, to live alongside a fruitfulness that only deepened your own emptiness. The pain drove her to a desperate cry. "Give me children," she said, "or else I die." It was not a polite request. It was the raw, anguished scream of a woman who felt that life without this longed-for child was no life at all. Perhaps you have prayed something close to that, in words you would never say aloud. The cry of a soul that cannot imagine how to go on carrying this particular emptiness. And I want you to notice that the scripture records that cry without condemning it. It does not add a note scolding Rachel for her lack of perspective, or reminding her of all she should have been grateful for, or telling her she was being dramatic. It simply lets her anguish stand, raw and unedited, preserved forever in the sacred text exactly as she felt it. There is a permission in that for you. The world may tell you your grief is excessive, that you have so much else to be thankful for, that others have it worse, that you should not let this longing consume you so. But God did not censor Rachel's desperate cry, and He does not stand over yours with a red pen either. He can bear the full, unreasonable, overwhelming size of your longing. You do not have to shrink it down to a socially acceptable sadness before you bring it to Him. The God who let Rachel's "give me children or else I die" stand in His Word for all time is a God who can receive the true, uncensored depth of what you feel and love you in the midst of it, without ever once telling you that you feel too much. And here is what the scripture says, simply and beautifully. God remembered Rachel, and God hearkened to her. God remembered her. Now, God had never actually forgotten her. The scripture uses that word to tell us that, after the long silence, God turned His attention toward her in a particular way, that her years of grief had not gone unseen, that He had heard every one of her desperate prayers all along. I want you to hold on to that, separate from everything else about her story, because this is the part that is surely true for you tonight. You are remembered. The God who seemed silent through all your praying has not forgotten you. Every tear you have cried in private, every prayer you thought went nowhere, every month of crushed hope, He has seen, He has heard, He has kept. You are not invisible to heaven, however invisible your grief feels on earth. You are remembered, as surely as Rachel was, by a God who never once looked away. And there is something else in her story worth holding, something honest about the messiness of this grief. Rachel was not a serene, patient saint about her barrenness. She was envious of her sister. She was desperate, demanding, at times bitter and unkind in her pain. And yet God did not turn away from her for it. He did not require her to grieve gracefully before He would draw near. I tell you this because the longing for a child can bring out things in us we are ashamed of. The envy when a friend announces a pregnancy, the resentment we do not want to feel, the anger at God we are afraid to admit. And you may have judged yourself harshly for those feelings, piling shame on top of grief. But hear this from Rachel's story. God saw all of her, the desperation and the envy and the unlovely cries, and He remembered her still. He is not standing over your grief with a checklist of how nobly you are bearing it. He sees the whole tangled ache of it. The parts you are proud of and the parts you would never say aloud. And He draws near to all of it with mercy. You do not have to clean up your grief before you bring it to Him. He remembered Rachel as she was. He remembers you as you are. Before I go further, let me pause for something important and gentle. The grief of longing for a child can grow so heavy that it begins to crush the spirit, sinking into a depression, a bitterness, a darkness in which it becomes hard to see any reason to go on. If that is where this longing has taken you, if the weight has become more than you can carry, please do not carry it alone in silence. Reach out to a trusted friend, a counselor, a pastor, a doctor, a support community of others who understand this specific grief, or a helpline in your country. You are not a burden for needing help, and reaching for it is not weakness or faithlessness. It is wisdom, and it may be the very lifeline God uses to carry you through. This grief was never meant to be borne in isolation, and if it would help, you can write one word in the comments, simply the word "seen," so you can see how many others are walking through this same silent sorrow tonight, and know you are not alone. Now let me tell you about another woman who waited far longer than Rachel ever did. In the Gospel of Luke, there is a woman named Elisabeth, and her story speaks to those who have waited so long that hope itself has nearly died. She was, the scripture says, barren, and she and her husband were both now well stricken in years, which is to say, they were old, well past the age when a child could be expected, having carried the ache of childlessness across an entire lifetime. Think of all those years, the early years of hoping each month, the middle years of treatments and prayers and disappointments, the later years of slowly, painfully letting go of the dream, of making a kind of peace with arms that would always be empty. And here is what I most want you to see about Elisabeth, before we ever get to how her story turned. Through all those barren decades, the scripture says she was righteous before God, walking blamelessly in His ways. Her barrenness never once lowered her standing with God. She was not less faithful, less beloved, less precious to Him because her womb was closed. For an entire lifetime, she carried what the world called a reproach, and through every empty year of it, God saw her not as defective, but as righteous, faithful, and dear. Sit with that for a moment, because it overturns the cruelest thing this grief whispers. The world around Elisabeth would have looked at her empty arms and drawn conclusions that she was cursed, that she had done something wrong, that God's favor had passed her by, that a childless woman was somehow a lesser woman. That was the reproach, the shame the culture laid on the barren. And every bit of it was wrong. Heaven's assessment of Elisabeth was the exact opposite of the world's. While people may have pitied or whispered, God called her righteous, walking blamelessly before him. Her standing with God was not 1 inch diminished by her empty womb. The thing the world counted as her great lack, God did not count against her at all. And if that was true for Elisabeth, it is true for you. Whatever the world's eyes say, whatever your own accusing thoughts say in the dark, the verdict of God over your life is not reproach. He does not see a defective, lesser, cursed person when he looks at you. He sees one he loves, one he calls his own, one whose worth was settled by him long before any question of children ever arose, and whose worth no childlessness could ever lower. And then, in her old age, long past all hope, God did something only God could do, and gave her a son. And she said that God had taken away her reproach among the people. Now, I want to be very careful and very honest here, because I will not turn Elisabeth's story into a promise I have no right to make. Her story is not a guarantee that if you wait long enough, you too will hold a child. Some who long for children do, in time, in unexpected ways. And some, with hearts just as faithful and prayers just as fervent, never do. And they are not loved 1 ounce less by God for it. So hear the part of Elisabeth's story that is surely yours, not the certainty of a baby, but the certainty that the reproach the world laid on her was never God's verdict. That her worth was secure through every barren year, and that she was righteous and beloved in the eyes of God long before any child ever came, and would have been just as beloved if none ever had. I dwell on this so carefully because I know how these stories can be misused, how they can be turned into a kind of cruelty, as if every barren woman in Scripture eventually conceiving is proof that you will too if you just hold on. That is not the lesson, and to teach it would be to wound you further. The barren women whose stories ended in children were part of a particular plan God was unfolding through their specific lives, often because the child to come had a unique place in His larger purposes. Their stories are not a template guaranteeing your outcome. What their stories do show you, reliably and for certain, is the character of the God behind them. A God who sees the childless, who hears their cries, who counts them righteous and beloved in their waiting, and who is near to the brokenhearted. That character does not change with the outcome. Whether your story holds a child or not, the God revealed in Elisabeth's life is your God too. And He looks on you exactly as He looked on her through all her empty years, with love, with honor, and with no reproach at all. And to show you that God still meets people tenderly in this exact grief, let me tell you about a woman named Jennifer Saake. She had grown up dreaming of a large family, and instead she walked into one of the longest and hardest valleys a longing heart can know. For about a decade, she and her husband endured infertility, the diagnosis, the treatments, the failures. And through those years, they lost child after child to miscarriage and saw hoped-for adoptions fall through. One heartbreak stacked upon another. And under the sheer weight of that accumulated grief, her faith nearly broke. She has spoken honestly about how she became angry with God, how bitterness took root, how she sank into a deep depression and a darkness so heavy that there were seasons she struggled to find a reason to keep going at all. Her story is not a tidy one. It is the raw, real account of a faithful woman nearly crushed by this very longing. And I tell you that part honestly, because you may be in that dark place too, And you need to know you are not the only believer who has ever been brought that low by this grief. But that is not where her story ended. Slowly, the Lord broke through her bitterness and met her in the darkness, not by instantly fixing everything, but by being present in the ruins. And out of her own broken heart, she began something small, a little support group for others walking the same road, which grew, over the years, into a ministry that has reached and comforted tens of thousands of hurting families around the world. And there is something worth pausing on in that, because it shows what God can do with a grief that is not wasted. The comfort she now offers to thousands flows directly out of the very pain she thought would destroy her. She could not have comforted them the way she does had she not walked the road herself, wept the same tears, sunk into the same dark. Her sorrow, surrendered to God, became the source of healing for countless others who needed someone who truly understood. I do not say this to put pressure on your pain, as if you must turn your grief into a ministry to justify it. I say it only to show you that God wastes nothing, that even this, even the grief that feels so purely destructive right now, is not beyond His power to redeem and use, in time, in ways you cannot yet imagine. Your pain is not pointless in His hands. He has a long history of making the deepest wounds into the deepest wells of compassion. Now, in time, she did come to have living children, and I mention it honestly, but I will not hand it to you as a formula, because it is not one. In fact, she has said something I think you most need to hear. She came to dislike the way people used the old Bible stories of barren women as a kind of weapon, as if they proved that if you only had enough faith, God would surely give you a baby too. She rejected that lie, because it is a lie, and a cruel one. What she learned instead, in the long dark, was not a guaranteed outcome, but a present God. A God who heard her, who was with her in the grief, who did not abandon her in the waiting, whatever the waiting held. That is the hope her story offers you. Not a promise of a child, the promise of a God who meets you in the ache and never leaves. And notice where she found God, because it matters for you. She did not find Him at the finish line of her grief, only after everything was resolved. She found Him in the middle of it, in the depression, in the bitterness, in the dark seasons when she could barely hold on. The God who met her was not waiting on the far side of her suffering for her to arrive cleaned up and joyful again. He was with her in the ruins, present in the very places that felt most God-forsaken. This is so important to hear, because in your darkest moments, you may feel that God is far away, that He has abandoned you to this grief, that He will only be near again when, or if, the longing is finally answered. But that is not where He is. He is here, now, in the unresolved middle, in the bitterness you are ashamed of, in the prayers that feel unheard, in the dark you cannot find your way out of. You do not have to wait for a happy ending to encounter Him. He is in the valley with you, not just at its end. And you may, like Jennifer, meet Him most deeply in the very place you thought He had left. So let me tell you what is actually true, the truth all of this has been pointing toward. God sees the grief that no one else sees. There is a tender line in the Psalms where the writer, in his sorrow, says to God, "Put thou my tears into thy bottle." It is a startling picture of a God who does not let a single one of your tears fall unnoticed to the ground, but catches each one and keeps it as something precious. Every tear you have wept in private over this longing, every one you blinked back at the baby shower, every one that soaked your pillow in the dark, God has seen and caught and kept. Your grief is not invisible to Him, even when it is invisible to everyone around you. It is gathered up and treasured by a God who counts your sorrows as carefully as a jeweler counts pearls. You are not weeping into the void. You are weeping into the hands of a God who keeps every tear. And think about why someone keeps a thing in a bottle. You do not bottle and preserve what is worthless. You keep what is precious, what you cannot bear to lose, what means something to you. That God would gather your tears into a bottle tells you exactly how He regards your sorrow. Not as an annoyance, not as weakness, not as something to be gotten past as quickly as possible, but as something precious to Him, because it flows from a heart He treasures. Your grief matters to God. Not one tear of it is wasted or dismissed or forgotten. In a world that does not know how to mourn with you, that cannot even see the loss you carry, there is a God who has been collecting every drop of your sorrow with the care of someone preserving something irreplaceable. You have not grieved alone, even when it felt that way. Every private tear has had a witness, a tender one who counted it, kept it, and held it close. And a God who treasures your tears like that is not a God who is indifferent to your pain. He is a God who feels it with you, and your worth was never tied to your fertility. This is one of the cruelest lies the longing tells, that you are somehow less, incomplete, a failure, because a child has not come. But you have to hear how God sees it. There is a place in the Scriptures where God speaks to those who would never have children of their own, and instead of pity, He offers them honor. He promises them, within His house and within His walls, a name better than of sons and of daughters, an everlasting name that will never be cut off. Do you hear the staggering tenderness of that? To the ones the world counted as lacking, God offers a name better than children, a worth and a belonging and a legacy that does not depend on offspring at all. Your value was never measured by your womb. It was settled long ago by a God who calls you His own and who has prepared for you a name and a place that no childlessness can ever take away. And consider what it means that God chose, of all the comparisons He could have made, to promise a name better than sons and daughters. He did not say a name equal to children, or a name to make up for the lack of them. He said better. In a culture that counted children as the highest blessing and the surest legacy, God looked at those who would never have them and offered something He ranked higher still, a place in His own house, an everlasting name written by His own hand, a belonging and a permanence that no lineage on earth could rival. This is not a consolation prize hastily offered to the disappointed. It is a window into how God actually measures a life, by something deeper and more lasting than whether your name is carried on by a child. The legacy He offers you is one that does not depend on offspring and cannot be cut off. A name secure in eternity, a place in the household of God that is yours forever. Your life will leave a mark, a real and lasting one. Whether or not a child ever calls you mother or father, because the one who keeps the everlasting names has already written yours. And God can bring life and fruitfulness in ways you cannot yet imagine. I say this carefully, because I will not promise you a pregnancy, but I will tell you that the God who is the author of all life is not limited to the one path your heart has fixed upon, and that many who have walked this valley have found, in time, that He brought forth life and family and deep purpose through doors they never expected. By birth, by adoption, by spiritual motherhood and fatherhood to children not born of them, by a fruitfulness of love poured out in ways that blessed generations. Your longing to nurture, to love, to give life is a holy longing placed in you by God. And even if it is not fulfilled in the exact way you have dreamed, it need not go forever unfulfilled. Hold your specific hope with one open hand and trust that the God of life has not run out of ways to make a longing heart fruitful. And let me be especially careful here, because this is tender ground. When I speak of other paths, of adoption, of spiritual parenthood, of a fruitfulness poured out in other ways, I am not telling you to abandon the longing for a child of your own, or to be satisfied with a substitute, or to hear in this a gentle pressure to simply move on. Your specific longing is real and good, and you are allowed to keep grieving it, even as you remain open to how God might yet work. I am only saying that the love welling up in you, the love that aches to be poured into a child, is not destined to be wasted, even if the path it takes is not the one you imagined. There are children in this world who need exactly the love you have to give. There are lives that could be shaped by your mothering or fathering of the heart. There is fruit your love can bear that you cannot yet see from inside the grief. None of that erases your specific hope, and none of it is offered as a tidy replacement. It is simply a reminder that the deep capacity for love that this longing reveals in you is holy, and that the God who placed it there has not run out of soil in which it might one day grow. And notice what your very longing reveals about you, because it is beautiful. The ache you feel is the ache of a heart made to give life and pour out love, a heart with so much to offer that its emptiness is agony. That is not a small or shameful thing. It is one of the most God-like longings a person can carry. For God Himself is a giver of life and a lavisher of love. The capacity in you that makes this grief so sharp is the same capacity that would make you a fountain of blessing to whoever receives it, in whatever form it finally finds. So even now, in the waiting, that love need not lie entirely dormant. There are lonely people who could be warmed by it, younger ones who could be guided by it, hurting ones who could be held by it. None of that is meant to replace the child you long for or to rush you past your grief. It is only to say that the love itself, the holy thing this longing has revealed in you, is too precious to be wasted. And the God who gave it to you knows exactly how much the world needs what your heart was made to give. So let me speak now to the lies that this grief has been telling you. The first lie is that God has forgotten you, that your prayers have gone unheard, that you have been overlooked while others are blessed. But you have seen now that God remembered Rachel, that He keeps your tears in His bottle, that He saw Elisabeth as righteous through every barren year. God has not forgotten you. The silence is not absence. Your prayers have not vanished. They are heard and held by a God who is doing more in the waiting than you can presently see, and who has never once lost track of you or your longing. Silence, after all, is not the same as absence. When you pray and hear nothing back, the temptation is to conclude that no one is listening, that your words are dropping into an empty sky. But the silence of God is one of the most misunderstood things in all of faith. Again and again in the Scriptures, the people who felt most certain that God had forgotten them were precisely the ones He was, in hidden ways, working most carefully on behalf of. His silence was never neglect. It was the quiet of a love at work in ways too deep to be seen. Rachel thought she was forgotten, and God remembered her. Elisabeth's lifetime of unanswered longing was not God ignoring her, but God writing a story whose meaning she could not yet grasp. You cannot see what God is doing in your waiting, and that is agony. But the unseen is not the unreal. Behind the silence is not an empty heaven, but a God who is nearer than your own breath, who has heard every prayer, and who is at work in the dark in ways you will one day understand. The quiet does not mean He is gone. It means you must trust Him where you cannot yet see Him. And the day may come, in this life or the next, when you look back and finally understand that He was nearest in the very seasons He seemed most silent, working in the dark on things your eyes could not yet make out. The second lie is that something is wrong with you, that you are being punished, that this grief is a verdict on your worth. But a closed womb is not a moral failing, and infertility is not a punishment. Some of the most faithful and beloved people in the Scriptures longed for children for decades. Your longing unfulfilled is not God's judgment on you. It is a sorrow you share with some of the most cherished saints in His Word. And it says nothing about your goodness, your faith, or your worth in His eyes. We live in a world that desperately wants suffering to have a tidy cause, because if pain always has a reason, then perhaps we can avoid it by being good enough. So when someone suffers, the quiet assumption creeps in that they must have done something to deserve it. You may have absorbed that assumption about yourself, scouring your past for the sin, the mistake, the failure that brought this on, certain that if you could just find and fix it, the blessing would come. But that is not how God deals with His children, and your barrenness is not a punishment being meted out for some hidden fault. The rain falls on the righteous and the unrighteous alike. The joys and sorrows of this broken world are not distributed as wages for behavior. Stop searching yourself for the crime that earned this grief. There is no such crime. This is not God settling a score with you. It is a sorrow of living in a world not yet made whole. And the God who allowed it into your life has not done so to punish you, but walks with you through it, as a father walks with a hurting child, with compassion, not condemnation. And if some part of you still suspects you are the exception, that everyone else's suffering has an innocent cause, but yours must be deserved, hear this plainly. God is not angry with you, and He is not getting even with you. The cross settled, once and for all, how God deals with those He loves, and it was not with punishment, but with mercy. Whatever this grief is, it is not the bill for some hidden debt. You can stop bracing for judgment that is not coming. The third lie is that you are incomplete, less of a person without a child. But your completeness was never going to come from a child. No child can carry the weight of being someone's entire wholeness. You were made complete in the God who formed you and calls you His own. And that completeness is yours whether or not your arms are ever filled. A child is a gift, a profound and beautiful one. But a child was never meant to be the thing that makes you a whole and worthy person. You already are one, fully, in the eyes of the only one whose verdict finally matters. And there is a quiet freedom waiting in that truth. if you can begin to receive it. For as long as you believe a child is the missing piece that will finally make you whole, you live in a kind of suspended state, your real life always just out of reach, waiting to begin until the longing is fulfilled. But if your wholeness is already settled in God, then your life is not on hold. It is happening now, even here, even in the waiting. You are free to live, to love, to grow, to find joy and purpose in this very season, not as a consolation for what you lack, but as the genuine, valuable life of a whole person who happens to be carrying a deep sorrow. The longing does not have to put your existence on pause. You are not less alive, less yourself, less here, because the child has not come. You are a complete and beloved soul, living a real and meaningful life right now, held by a God who calls that life precious exactly as it is today. This is hard to feel, I know, because the longing is so deep that it can seem to define the whole shape of your life, as though there is a person-sized hole in you that only a child could fill. But consider that the desire for a child, holy and good as it is, was never meant to be the foundation of your identity, and that no human being, not even a longed-for child, was ever designed to bear the weight of being your wholeness. Children grow up and become their own people. They were never meant to be the answer to the question of who you are. That question was answered before you ever longed for anything, in the simple fact that you were made and loved by God, knit together by Him, called His own. That is the bedrock of who you are, and it does not shift with your circumstances. A child would be a gift laid on top of a wholeness you already possess, not the missing piece that finally makes you complete. You are not half a person waiting to be finished. You are a whole and beloved soul, carrying a deep and worthy longing. And the longing, however painful, does not make you less than complete in the eyes of the God who made you whole. And the fourth lie is the cruelest one, the one Jennifer had to reject, that if you only had enough faith, God would give you a baby. This is not how God works, and it is not in the Bible, however often it is wrongly drawn from it. Faith is not a coin you insert to receive the outcome you want. The faithful do not always receive the thing they ask for, and the ones who do not receive it are not lacking in faith. So lay that lie down, and lay down the exhausting guilt that comes with it. Your longing is not a faith test you are failing. It is a grief God is tenderly carrying with you, with no scolding and no conditions. And if anyone has wielded that lie against you, even gently, even with good intentions, you can forgive them and still refuse what they said, because the weight it puts on you is unbearable and untrue. It makes you responsible for your own heartbreak, as though your empty arms are the measure of a faith that came up short. Picture what that would actually mean, that God withholds children from those who do not believe hard enough, and grants them to those who do. It would make Him a cruel accountant, and it would mean every faithful, childless believer who ever lived simply did not try hard enough to please Him. You know in your heart that cannot be true. The God revealed in Scripture does not ration His gifts according to the intensity of our striving. So set that crushing burden down. Your faith, however small or battered it feels, is not the thing standing between you and a child. And your grief is not evidence against you. You can stop trying to manufacture a faith big enough to earn what was never for sale, and simply rest in the love of a God who is not grading you, but grieving with you. So what do you do when your arms are empty and your heart is so full of longing? A few gentle things. Let yourself grieve it as the real loss it is. This is not nothing. It is the loss of a deeply held dream, of an imagined future, of children pictured and longed for. And it deserves to be mourned. Do not let anyone, including yourself, tell you that you have no right to this grief because nothing visible was lost. Name it as loss. Let yourself weep for it. Bring the full weight of your sorrow to God, who keeps your tears in His bottle. And refuse the lie that you must minimize a pain He takes so seriously. It may help to give your grief room in some tangible way, the way mourners have always done. Some who carry this sorrow find it healing to mark it somehow, to write down the dreams they are grieving, to name before God the children they imagined, to give themselves permission to have a hard day when a hard day comes, rather than forcing themselves to push through. Grief that is allowed to be grief, that is honored rather than hidden, tends in time to soften, while grief that is constantly suppressed only hardens and festers in the dark. So do not demand of yourself a relentless, smiling strength. Let the sorrow have its seasons. Let the tears come when they come. You are not indulging weakness when you grieve honestly. You are tending a real wound, the only way wounds can truly heal, by not pretending they are not there. And all of it, every tear and every named dream, you can bring openly to the God who treats this grief as worthy of His full attention. There is no sorrow too small, too private, or too unspeakable to lay before Him, and nothing you feel will ever make Him turn away. Bring the raw longing honestly to God, exactly as it is. You do not have to pray polished, submissive prayers when your heart is screaming. Rachel cried out, "Give me children, or else I die." The scriptures are full of people who brought their rawest, most desperate longings straight to God without dressing them up. So tell Him the truth. Tell Him how much you want this, how long you have waited, how angry and tired and heartbroken you are. He can hold all of it. The honest cry of an aching heart is a prayer He has always welcomed, and it is far more pleasing to Him than a calm you do not feel. You may worry that it is irreverent to pray that way, that God expects composure and gratitude, that your anger or desperation might offend Him. But the prayers preserved in the scriptures are often anything but composed. They are full of raw questions, honest complaints, even accusations flung at heaven by people who loved God and trusted Him enough to tell Him the truth. God did not strike them down for their honesty. He drew nearer to it, because honesty is the language of real relationship, and pretense is its enemy. The God who already knows the true state of your heart is not fooled by a polite prayer that hides your real anguish, and He is not honored by it either. What honors Him is trust, and there is no deeper trust than bringing Him the parts of your heart you are most afraid to show, believing He is big enough and loving enough to hold them. So do not edit your prayers down to what you think is acceptable. Pour out the real thing. The God who keeps your tears can certainly handle your words. Ask boldly for the desire of your heart and hold it with open hands. You are allowed to ask God plainly and persistently for the child you long for. Asking is not faithless, it is what God's children do with their deepest desires. But hold the asking together with surrender, the open-handed trust that says, "This is my heart's cry, and I lay it before you, and I will trust you with the answer, whatever it is." That is not resignation. It is the hardest and holiest kind of faith. To want something with your whole heart and still entrust the outcome to a God whose love for you does not depend on which answer He gives. And do not mistake that open-handedness for giving up, because it is the opposite. Giving up would be to stop caring, to numb the longing, to pretend the desire away. Open-handed faith does not numb the longing at all. It carries the full weight of the desire and, at the same time, refuses to let that desire become a god that must be obeyed, or a condition God must meet to keep your trust. It says, "I want this with everything in me, and I am asking you for it with everything in me. And even so, you are my God, and you will be my God, whatever you give or do not give." That is an agonizing place to stand, holding desire and surrender together. And you will likely have to return to it again and again, your hands curling closed around the longing, and then, with God's help, opening once more. Do not be discouraged when you have to surrender the same hope 100 times. The opening of the hand is not a single act, but a practice. And each time you do it, even imperfectly, even through tears, you are trusting God in the deepest way a human being can, and He honors that trust more than you know. Protect your heart in the hard moments, without shame. It is all right to step back from the baby shower if it would wound you too deeply. It is all right to mute the announcement, to skip the gathering, to set a boundary around the conversations that cut. Guarding your heart in this season is not bitterness or weakness, it is wisdom. You do not owe anyone your presence at the events that will break you, and you do not have to apologize for the boundaries that keep your heart safe enough to keep going. If a gathering will leave you shattered for days, it is all right to send your love and stay home. If certain conversations consistently wound you, it is all right to keep a gentle distance. This is not you becoming hard or cold. It is you tending a wound that is still raw, the way you would protect any healing injury from being struck again and again. The people who truly love you will understand, and the ones who do not understand do not get to set the terms of how you survive this. You are not required to martyr your own heart on the altar of everyone else's celebrations. Guard the wound while it heals, and trust that protecting your heart in a hard season is not a failure of love, but the very thing that lets love survive. And seek out the few who can sit with you in the grief without trying to fix it, the ones who will simply be present and not offer tidy explanations. And let the others, the platitude givers, keep a respectful distance from the tender places. And please, if this grief has begun to take you somewhere dark, do not try to be strong alone. The longing for a child has driven even deeply faithful people, as it did Jennifer, into depression and despair, into a heaviness where the light seems to go out. There is no shame in that, and there is no shame in getting help for it. If you find yourself sinking, if the grief has turned into a darkness that frightens you or a hopelessness you cannot shake, reach out today to a doctor, a counselor, a pastor, a trusted friend, or a helpline in your country, and let someone help you carry this. You were never meant to bear a weight this heavy in isolation. Asking for help is not a failure of faith or strength. It is one of the bravest and wisest things a hurting person can do. And it may be exactly how God intends to hold you up. You matter. Beyond your ability to have a child, beyond this grief, beyond anything you can or cannot do. Your life is precious, and there are people and help and hope for you, even on the darkest night of this longing. Let me leave you with this, and then I will let you go gently. I told you earlier about the tears in the bottle, and I want you to carry that picture with you, because I think it holds the whole of what I most want you to know. Imagine, for a moment, every tear you have ever cried over this longing. The ones in the doctor's office, the ones in the bathroom after another disappointment, the ones you hid behind a smile at someone else's celebration, the ones that come in the dark, when the house is quiet and the longing is loud. Imagine all of them, every single one, across all these years. And now imagine that not one of them fell to the ground unnoticed. Imagine that a God who loves you was there for each one, catching it, keeping it, gathering it into a bottle, recording it in a book, treasuring your sorrow as something precious because it came from a heart he loves. That is not a picture of a God who has forgotten you. That is not a picture of a God who does not care, or does not see, or has turned his face away. It is a picture of a God who has been near for every tear, who has missed none of your grief, who holds your sorrow as tenderly as he holds you. And there is one more thing that picture tells you, something quietly powerful. A bottle of tears is a record that is kept, which means your grief is not erased or wasted, but held, as though it matters to the future and not only to the moment. In God's economy, nothing offered to him is ever lost, not even your tears. The sorrow you have poured out is not simply pain to be endured and forgotten. It is being gathered up by a God who wastes nothing, who can take even the bitterest grief and, in ways you cannot yet see, weave it into something that bears meaning. I cannot tell you what he will make of your tears, but I can tell you they are not falling into nothing. They are being kept by one who has a purpose for everything he keeps, and who has promised that those who sow in tears will, in his time and his way, reap in joy. Even if the joy looks different from what you imagined. Your weeping is seen, your weeping is kept, and your weeping is not the end of the story God is telling with your life. I cannot tell you what your future holds. I cannot promise you the child your arms ache for, but I can tell you this with certainty. You are seen, you are remembered, and your tears are kept. The God who collected every one of them has not forgotten you, and he is not finished writing your story. Whatever path lies ahead, you do not walk it forgotten. You do not weep unseen, and you are not, and never will be, alone. The one who keeps your tears keeps you, and he will be near as he has always been, for every step of whatever comes. And when you wake tomorrow, and the longing is still there, and the house is still quiet, and the ache rises again with the morning, take this with you and hold it close. You are seen. You are remembered. Your tears are kept. And you are not alone. Say it when the announcement comes, when the question is asked, when the empty room stands silent behind a closed door. God has not forgotten you. He has not turned away. He has counted every tear and treasured every one. And he walks beside you in this valley with a tenderness deeper than you can feel on the hardest days. I cannot tell you how your story ends, but I can tell you who is writing it with you, and that he is good, and that he loves you with a love your empty arms could never diminish, and a child could never increase. Your worth is settled. Your name is written. Your tears are kept. And the God who has been near for every one of them will not leave you now. So rest tonight, dear heart. You are carried, even here. You are loved, even now, and you are held through every step of the road ahead by the one who has never once looked away and who never, ever will. Sleep, then, under the gaze of the God who keeps your tears, and let your weary heart be still in the keeping of the one who has never forgotten you and never could.